Welcome back to NTV Weekend Edition. Now let's go beyond the headlines tonight to unpack the broader implications. How does the result of the AUC elections affect Kenya's internal politics, the push for a broad-based government, and the future of continental leadership? To help us answer these questions, we're joined by two distinguished guests, Professor Migai Akech, an international trade lawyer and governance expert, as well as Dr. Martin Olo, head of public law at Daystar University, as well as a seasoned political analyst. Gentlemen, good evening. Thank you so much for being with us on NTV Weekend Edition tonight. It's been an interesting day. Let me begin with you. Dr. Olo, what do you make of Mahmoud Yusuf's victory over Raila Odinga in the AUC chairmanship race?
I think, first of all, thank you for having me, Michelle. I haven't been on NTV in a long while. And to meet my good friend, the professor here. There were a number of issues to come through. First of all, Mohammed appeared to have had a lot of support from the word go. He had the French-speaking support, he had the Arab or Muslim-speaking support. And so he started off as a strong candidate. And then you have a continent that is fairly divided, even within SADC and within East Africa. You have, there's highly likely, happening that some members of the East African community didn't vote with Kenya. And so you have that division, you have the DRC situation. So that just complicated things for Kenya, and perhaps readily handed over this mantle to Djibouti. So it's really not very unexpected, but perhaps unfortunate that Africa remains so divided, even on a simple issue as elections of an official.
Professor Akech, what are your reactions, and especially in your view, what are the key factors that led to this outcome? Because Raila Odinga was also seen as a front runner in this race.
Raila Odinga was never a front runner in this race. I don't know where did they get that from. But first of all, thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to this show. Raila Odinga was never a first runner. If you're familiar with African politics and the way that the African Union works, so the most powerful nations, I don't know how they voted in Africa. So the votes tend to follow the leaders. The leaders are Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria. I did not follow the debates today, but I bet they voted for the Djibouti candidate, Mr. Mahmoud. But that aside, there are internal factors and there are external factors as well. If you look at what is happening in the DRC now, it is pitting SADC against the East African community. Right. Even within the East African community on the DRC, we are divided. Kenya has not been seen to be, how do I put it, to be advancing an Pan-African position on the DRC, number one. But if you look at it globally as well, Kenya again has not been seen to be advancing a Pan-African position. Because if you're looking at the Middle East, the Palestinian question, for example, most African states are pro-Palestine. That is why today I think the president of Palestine is usually given time to a platform to make a speech on the day of the summit, and I don't think today was any different. So most African states are very pro-Palestine. Kenya has taken a position that is contra Palestine. So when you look at both those two scenarios, you can readily see why Kenya, Raila Odinga as Kenya's candidate, was never going anywhere.
There has been many concerns, Dr. Lord, that there might have been external influence in this election as well, outside of continental and regional politics. External influence from countries that are involved in the scramble for Africa, the US, China, Russia, France as well. How do you think that impacted the outcome of this election?
Let's admit that Africa is part of the globe, and the scramble for Africa remains a reality today. So whoever wants a piece of Africa must also determine how Africa looks like. And then let's also admit that Kenya hasn't played its role fairly well in terms of geopolitics. We've sometimes made statements against for or sometimes against Israel, so we don't know where we are. Sometimes we've gone the China route, and sometimes we've gone the American route. But be that as it may, we have a new sheriff in town. I think the message that is coming from Washington is they don't care about any of those things. What they care is trade. What they care is about how they can penetrate every region and make money through business and so on. So they are looking for friends who can allow them. They are ready to talk with China. They are ready to talk with Russia. So no more about Cold War and so on. So the losers here are perhaps the European Union and others, especially NATO members and so on. But basically what we want to say is that the AU seat is so important, and whoever is the chief executive, who is the chairman, would be a very important person. So would the other countries or other nations be interested in that seat? Absolutely. And perhaps they wanted to have a hand in it. But more importantly for me is perhaps they're also looking at who can they deal with, who can they trust, and who can do business with them. So in this particular case, it looks like the die was cast.
So we've seen, Professor Ketch, the voting process going to 7 rounds. And, often it really goes beyond a few rounds unless there's an actual contestation or regional divisions. What did the voting process, it going to 7 rounds, indicate about Africa's political dynamics?
I think for me, the voting process took the normal route. I think there was a bit of, I didn't watch it, but there's always a bit of jostling in the first rounds, as the countries shift position depending on the candidates. And once the Madagascar candidate, it was clear that he wasn't going, to advance, then of course SADC shifts, and that changes the equation quite a bit. So I don't think that, look, I did not expect it to take 7 rounds, but I did not expect that Raila Odinga would win this election.
Yeah. And maybe to say that you have to have 33 votes, 2/3. And so if you don't get it, it must go on up to a point where if there's a tie, then the solution is to call off the election. So those rounds were necessary to the extent that you didn't have a clear winner. Until when Mahmoud was at 26 and Raila was still at 21, 22, and then he threw in the towel. That's when now the other SADC members or the other people who are abstaining now were able to vote to 33. So basically what you're saying is that the African continent, as usual, is divided along certain geopolitical reasons.
Right.
So,
when you come back home...
Sorry, Michelle. So there are two geopolitical factors there. There's the Muslim question. So you're pitting
Anglophone versus
Anglophone, and then you're pitting an Anglophone versus a Francophone candidate. So as soon as it is clear to the Francophones and the Muslim countries that they have a candidate, and if they are the majority, of course, their candidate is likely to win. So I think those two factors played quite well in Mahmoud's favor.
Now, Kenya lobbied heavily for Raila Odinga. In fact, President William Ruto went to Addis Ababa himself in the last minute to help secure the vote for Raila Odinga. Does the failure of Raila Odinga to win this position signal a failure in Kenya's foreign policy strategy, Dr. Olo?
Absolutely. Remember, we had been assured that this thing was a done deal. From the president himself, the foreign minister, the prime cabinet secretary, they had told us this thing was a done deal. Is it a rebuff to our diplomatic positioning? Yes, it is. Is it perhaps a statement on our president's ability to mobilize the rest of Africa? It is. Is it a question, is it something that can call us into questioning whether we are okay in terms of how we are playing? Absolutely. Is our role in DRC and perhaps a few other statements we have made pitting us against other African countries? Absolutely. When we say we have made a phone call to Macron in France, how does that work out? So there are many things that we've done. When South Africa says they are not with us, they are with SADC, Those are serious statements. So as a country, we must look at our diplomatic positioning again and decide how well to play. Certainly, it's a rebuff.
Do you agree, Dr. Kesh? Does this weaken Kenya's credibility as a continental leader?
But has Kenya been a continental leader as such? What is it that Kenya has done for Africa historically? Because for me, it seems Ruto's strategy was a very last-minute. It's very last-minute diplomacy. Diplomacy does not work that way. I worked for the African Union for a period of 3 years. I understand the institution very well. So if you see, for example, South Africa is respected as a leader because it has been doing that across time, and it's been consistent in its policies. Kagame in Rwanda is seen as an African leader because he has been consistent and they've been doing it across time, over decades. You don't wake up and say that, oh, you know, now we want to be leaders in Africa, but you're not championing anything in Africa. You're not taking African positions. You're taking positions that actually undermine Africa. Like, for example, calling Macron on the DRC when there are continental mechanisms for dealing with those issues. What is the president then saying about those continental mechanisms? Is it that Kenya does not respect those continental mechanisms for resolving conflicts in the continent? Yes.
That's a valid question. But let's take a look at what Kenyans have been saying. And the majority of Kenyans now say that Raila Odinga's loss in the African Union Commission chairmanship election was expected. In fact, according to them, Raila is better suited as an opposition leader and have appealed with him to return to the country to put President William Ruto's government in check. But as NTV's David Mudhoka reports, other Kenyans have expressed their disappointment of Raila's loss to Djibouti's Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, saying the former Prime Minister was the best candidate.
It was a roller coaster of emotions at the Aga Khan Walk at the heart of the country's capital, Nairobi, as the results of the African Union Commission chairmanship election kept streaming in on Saturday evening. While some cheered when the AUC chairman's seat appeared to be slipping away from a Kenyan candidate for a second consecutive AUC election, others could not believe their eyes. When it was official that Raila's journey to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia had come to a screeching and a grinding halt, Kenyans happy that Raila had lost could not contain their joy.
Kupoteza kwa Raila, hii kitu kwa tumeona mwanzo. Kwa nini serikali ya Kenya tumia pesa mingi kwa kisha kwamba Raila ameenda ili tu settle political score Kenya?
Hii kulose kwa Raila ni kitu tumezoea. So it is not a surprise to us. And then there is a narrative that people are trying to say that Ruto has stood with Raila. He has only stood with Raila for a UC seat. That is the only thing he has stood with Raila. And what about those people who have been with him all along? What about Kalonzo?
So now, let him come back. Let him settle down. Ruto, we want you to fix out Kenya. You concentrated outside with the AUC. Now you are here. The abductors, we want to know where are the kids. We want to know how is the economy. We want to know how is the corruption is going to be sorted out.
As you come back, kindly know that we will give you utaenda kupumzika vizuri kama ule ameenda retirement, and that's all that we can wish you for. For now, don't come back. Ruto has supported you, and 2027 hatutaki vita, hatutaki, tunataka amani, na Ruto kumi bila break.
However, another section was bitter with the news, but said that they accepted the outcome.
We should go and welcome in with a large number of people. Correct. Because the whole of Africa, imagine Raila was among the three. That's the first achievement. Alafu akawa number 2. Tunasema sahi baba ni namba ngapi? Number 2. That was a chance presented to us. We submitted our best, our finest, who is Raila. He has lost. He must come back to the country. He's our son.
In Kisumu, residents chanted Ruto must go to mean they do not want a William Ruto presidency after realizing that Raila, with full government support, was yet again unlucky at the ballot.
And Ruto, Mr. President, you are the President of the Republic of Kenya. Thank you for all you have done. But for now, the wars began. Majenzi, chukweni kura. 2027, sinde tunaamua.
And in Kiambu, there were mixed reactions after Raila's loss, but a majority of residents are happy that Raila is back.
Nimefurahi sana kwa baba kuanguka katika hiyo kiti, kwa sababu sio baba mbaya, ni yule anamuongoza ambayo ni mbaya. Angekuja kuchafua siasa za Kenya, angekuja kugeuza nia yake ambao alikuwa na tamaa, ambaye alikuwa anaweka pesa zake mahali pale ndio aweze kufanyia baba campaign. Nia yake haikuwa mzuri, na ndio unaona sisi kama wa Kenya tulikuwa tunajua, na ndio tumefurahi kwa baba kuanguka, lakini si kwa ajili baba ni mbaya.
Sasa mimi naona akirudi Kenya, kuna kazi nyingi sana anastahili kufanya, tutengeneze Kenya yetu. Kwa hivyo mimi nafurahia ya kuja Kenya, kuna nafasi kazi ni mingi, tutengeneze Kenya yetu.
Sijafurahia hivyo Raila, Mheshimiwa Raila ameanguka, maana hiyo kiti kama ingekuja Kenya tungekuwa na manufaa mingi sana kama hiyo kiti ingepatikana, lakini vile sasa ameanguka. Raila, tunakupenda sana na tunakuhitaji tena sana hapa Kenya.
In Homa Bay and Siaya, residents were split over whether to welcome or mourn Raila's loss.
Uongozi imemshinda, kila wakati amenyang'anywa. Baba rudi sago, tufanye kazi aende mbele kama kawaida.
Losing a battle is never the end of it. Life has to continue, and we want to encourage Baba. Baba has really fought for the nation. Baba has really fought for Africa as a whole.
More mixed reactions were evident in Machakos.
Jambo la kwanza, Raila hakuweza kutambua lugha ya Kifaransa, ijapokuwa ni mtu amekamilika kisiasa. Jambo ya pili, Raila upande wa Kiarabu hawezani.
Sababu ile nilikuwa nataka Raila apite ni hapa, ameitisha kiti safari 5. Bado alikuwa anaenda kule USC Afrika, aone kama atazanya hiyo kiti hapo, lakini si ameanguka.
More reactions are expected to come in the coming days and weeks. David Mothoka, NTV, Nairobi.
Well, Professor Migai Akech and Dr. Martin Oloa with us in studio to analyze the reactions of Kenyans following that AUC election. Gentlemen, just as we begin to wind up, Dr. Oloa, Raila Odinga has been a central figure in Kenyan politics for decades. Does this loss signal a shift in Kenya's political landscape ahead of the 2027 elections?
I don't think it signals a shift in the Kenya's political landscape, but it should signal a shift in Baba's politics. I think it is it. You cannot be losing in Kenya, losing in Africa, and still wanting more. It's time for him to call off and then to say, I want to change my role. So it's him to shift. Otherwise, for Kenya's politics shifted. The moment Baba went to start working with the Kenya Kwanza, I mean, Kenya's politics shifted. The youth, the progressives decided that these people are just about themselves. So when Baba comes back, I would tell him to come. I'm sure that he'll be welcomed very well, but he should now take time and relax, like all elders at 80.
Do you think that this loss diminishes his political capacity domestically?
Domestically, Baba began to erode his capacity the moment he began to give himself the opportunity of being led, being used, or being promised. So the moment you are, being presented as a candidate of some people, and particularly in this respect, I think there are a number of people that have since shifted from believing that he had what it took to liberate people. I think he has proved again that no, it's about his interests.
Right. Professor Akech, earlier today I spoke to the head of the National Communications Center, Charles Owino, and he alluded to perhaps, seeing a broader-based government from tomorrow. Could this outcome impact the ongoing discussions on Kenya's broad-based government and political realignments, in your view?
I think the hope from Ruto, to be precise, was that Raila Odinga would go to the AUC, and his attention therefore would shift to the AUC, which would give him greater space nationally. That has not happened. So I don't know if the relationship that they have is a comfortable one. I think it is a marriage of convenience. Ruto needed to deal with, stifle, so to speak, the Gen Z revolution. I don't know how much further they're going to be able to contain it. Because this is a phenomenon, I think, that is happening across the continent. Africa is a very youthful population. And they're going to be very restless with the levels of unemployment that we are seeing, with the levels of poverty that we are seeing. It's not going to change. So the politics has to change. But you're dealing with a generation that only knows to do politics in a particular way. So I don't know if it helps him. And I don't know how long this rapprochement is going to last. If it goes to 2027, I think they'll be very lucky.
Finally, and as give you final comments, Dr. Law, what lessons can Kenya take from this AUC election? Some say it was really similar to the situation in 2017 with Amina Mohamed. What lessons can be learned here?
I think Kenya needs to know and to understand its place in continental politics. The last we tried with Amina, we made quite a bit of inroads, but not good enough. With Baba, it was a political gamble, not good enough. So, again, we can ask, what is our place? What is our position, in terms of African politics and global politics? We may want to reboot. We may want to retrace our feet. Certainly, there is a way of saying that when it comes to Africa, Kenya is not taken seriously.
Professor Ketch, you seem to think that Kenya wasn't really a player on the continental stage, but with the AUC race lost, how can Kenya, in your case, position itself, but to reposition itself on the continental stage now?
Kenya has to invest in the African Union. Ask yourself, how many Kenyans work for the African Union? In numbers. You can count them. I think you can literally count the number of Kenyans that work for the organization and many of its agencies across the continent. In contrast, the African Union is dominated by West Africa, South Africa, and North Africa. They invest in the organization. And these things matter because the internal politics also help to shape how member states vote on important elections such as this. Because they are the people that will tell the president that this is our person, this is not our person. Mohamed Yusuf is somebody who's not new to the African Union. He's been an ambassador, for Djibouti's foreign minister for a very long time. African Union is run by foreign ministers. What is it called? Is it the executive committee? I forget the exact name. Is a committee of foreign ministers. It is them who run the organization. So those are his peers, and it's very easy for him to be able to marshal support among the heads of state, because this is not something that you do in a year or two. This is something that you invest in terms of participating in continental affairs, taking position on continental affairs, which South Africa does very well.
Would you say Kenya hasn't done that? We've seen President William Ruto essentially lead the continent in the sustainable movement, climate change.
Ruto has made speeches. There's a difference between making speeches and actually doing the real work that is meaningful and that can be seen in the continent. South Africans do it very well. South Africa takes, if any other countries is looking in the world, if any country is looking for leadership on African issues, who are the people that they're likely to talk to? Number one, to be South Africa. Number two, they'll be looking to Nigeria. If it is North Africa, they'll be looking to Egypt.
How can Kenya get itself there?
By investing in the organization.
All right.
By doing Look, for example, let me give you an example. South Africa has really come out on the question of Palestine, the Gaza situation. South Africa has been very prominent, actually taking Israel to court. When Kenya does that, then you see the rest of Africa will stand up and say that This is a country that we need to follow. Kenya has not been doing that. We've just been making speeches.
All right, yes. Gentlemen, many thanks for your time and for sharing your insights with NTV tonight. That is Professor Migai Akech. He is an international trade lawyer and governance